Both sides, Republican Congressman from Iowa, Mr. Steve King, and DNC Chairwoman, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Thanks to both of you for being here. Representative, we had you here just yesterday. You were saying, forget about what I agree with the president on. What does he agree with me on? And now, let's assume he is at the top of the food chain here, and he gave his message last night. It is for you to decide whether or not to follow. Is there anything you heard last night that will enable you to reach across and try and get something done for American families?
It was awfully hard to find. It really was. But I thought that unifying moment when he honored Sergeant Corey, when that was the longest standing ovation I remember in a State of the Union address. You could feel it. The emotion in the room had to go all the way to the ceiling and on outside the Capitol building. That did unify us in support of the sacrifice of our warriors, wounded and not, those we've lost and those that are serving today. I had that sense, and then when the First Lady walked in, you could also feel there's a warmth for the First Lady. We just disagree philosophically, and his major agenda is going to be something that divides Republicans and Democrats. I thought the speech would be designed to do that, and I think it did do that.
Do you agree? Forget about that. What am I asking you that for? That's going to go nowhere. He came forward and said, I'm going to do things myself. Does that make you think, well, we better work with him then? Or does it make you think, well, if he wants to dig in, I'll dig in?
Well, he's done that in the past. There are a number of places where the president has just issued an order or done a press conference or a third-tier notice on a U.S. Treasury Department website that changed the effect of changing law. So we understood he was going to do that. And of course, I stand up and defend the Constitution, and we talked about that yesterday. But I think one thing to think about is if a Republican presidential candidate decided to campaign for the election in 2016 and say, wherever and whenever I can, I'm going to use my executive authority to override Congress or ignore Congress. I will stretch the limits beyond the design of the Constitution. That would be appalling to Democrats. So I think we should join together and go back and take a look at the constitutional limitations of the Article 2 of our Constitution. And this president, if he overreaches, I think it'll be a big issue in the election in 2014 and
Congresswoman, putting the constitutionality aside, just in as much as the president can probably do what he's doing, at least with respect to the wages so far, as a tactic, though, why do you believe that this is the right way to get Washington moving again as Democrats?
Well, first of all, to back up for a second, I thought the speech was hopeful and resolute and clear, particularly on the president's goals, as congressional Democrats share them, on moving our economy forward, on focusing on making sure that everyone has an opportunity to reach the middle class, on making sure that the bread and butter issues of keeping a roof over your head and making sure that you can make ends meet, and that if you work hard and play by the rules, you can make it if you try hard here. Those are issues that should resonate with everybody and are completely, completely transcend partisan politics. What the president said, though, is, look, I've been president for 5 years, and he has consistently reached across the aisle, outstretched his hand, said, look, I am willing to work with anyone, Republican, Democrat, who has a good idea, and I want to sit down and find common ground. But I am not going to wait for intransigent Republicans who simply want to throw obstacles in the path of progress. And that's a totally reasonable approach, and within the boundaries of his executive authority, he said, I want to work with Republicans, but if you continue to want to be obstacles in the path of progress, then I'm going to move forward, particularly on making sure that we can continue to get our economy moving.
It's a metaphor what we're having here. Democrat, Republican, you're sitting next to each other, but you only talk to me. You could be miles apart. Let's
Steve
use
and I talk to each other all the time.
And you know
we
what?
are friends. We really are.
That's something that needs, I think, to be brought out into the fore. I think that the discussion really needs to be more between the two sides here, because you represent, one pole of your party very well. You are in one pole as well. How do you two look at each other and think about how do you figure out how to move forward together? Because you both say you care about the same things, but you don't want to work on it together.
Actually, although Steve and I have not sat down together and tried to hammer out what we could find agreement on, it does start with trust. It does start with building a relationship, and there needs to be more of that. I know that's why Congressman Dan Webster and I, who's a Republican from Florida, host a bipartisan dinner on a regular basis.
But that's the important kind of thing, isn't it, Congressman?
Build trust between each other.
You guys have to get past the straight ideological differences, because they're not going to change.
Well, because there's another way that this works, too, and that is that you have the whole political spectrum represented in the United States House of Representatives, from the left and to the right, and the decisions that get done in the middle. So there's a time that we find ourselves, in a friendly way, pulling in opposite directions, but that helps identify the disagreements, that helps the people that are more likely to be the first ones in the middle to shake hands and start talking and broaden that out. So I think that the negotiations start in the middle, and then they work both directions. We've seen a good number of bipartisan pieces of legislation pass out of this Congress. It wasn't necessarily because Debbie led on one side and I on the other side. We helped the others identify how they could agree.
Is there any chance that you think that that can be built on going into this year? Can it be a year of action?
Well, it has to be a year of action. I mean, we have to make sure that we can kick this economy into a more robust recovery. We have every opportunity to do that. There are simple, common sense things that we should do that the overwhelming majority of Americans support, making sure that we embrace a minimum wage so that no one, like the president said last night, has to live in poverty while holding down a job, making sure that at a minimum, if we ever go through another economic crisis, that people don't have to worry about whether they can remain in their homes, making sure that the bread and butter issues, like for women to make sure that if they have a job, they don't have to choose between caring for their families and keeping their job.
You share those goals.
Those are the basics.
You share those goals. The question is, can you work together to figure out how to secure those families? The face of that sergeant is the face of dedication of the fighting men and women, but it's also the face, as a metaphor, of the families who are fighting for their own out there every day. And I know you know the needs are great. The question is, can you provide?
I think there's more polarization in the Congress than Debbie's just described, though, and I'd ask people, if you want to understand the forces of nature that exist in Congress, is watch the video of the members of Congress and who stood and who didn't when each of these topics came up. That'll pretty much tell you. That's more instructive than the words of the president.
I study Boehner's face, as if it were a science. Listen, we have to leave it here for right now. I hope we have this discussion going forward. As you know, we're always here for you guys to reach out and forward this discussion and come at you when we have to. But Congresswoman, Congressman, thank you very much for taking the opportunity. I hope you guys can be as close as you are right now.
Peace be with you.
And also with you.
Peace be with you, and also with you. Very good, very good, very Christian. All right, so we're talking about the